Clara's life had become a series of predictable routines, each day blending into the next. She lived in a bustling city, surrounded by crowds, yet utterly alone. Her mornings started with a quiet breakfast, followed by long hours at her office desk, and evenings spent curled up in her tiny apartment. Her phone would buzz occasionally with social media updates or a polite "how are you" from distant friends, but nothing stirred her heart. Her love life was a closed chapter, or so she thought. Past relationships had left her disillusioned, their betrayals carving deep scars into her once trusting soul. She had loved with an open heart, only to be let down time and again by people who made promises they never intended to keep. The pain of those memories was her constant companion, reminding her to stay guarded. There was, however, one place where Clara found a semblance of peace, a small, cozy cafe nestled in a quiet corner of the city. The cafe, with its soft jazz music and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee, became her refuge. She would sit by the window, sipping her latte and watching the world pass by. Couples holding hands, families laughing, and friends chatting animatedly. It was all so close, yet she felt like an outsider looking in. Even in the solitude, she often imagined a different life for herself. She envisioned a version of Clara who was vibrant, loved, and full of life, a stark contrast to the quiet, reserved woman she had become. But those thoughts felt like fleeting dreams, impossible to grasp. Reality had taught her not to hope too much. One chilly evening, as rain drizzled against the cafe's glass window, Clara sat lost in her thoughts. She traced patterns on her coffee cup absent-mindedly, her mind wandering to yet another romantic novel she had read the night before. It was always the same, the heroine finding love, her life transformed by someone who saw her for who she truly was. That's when she noticed him. A man she had never seen before walked into the cafe, shaking rain off his coat. His presence was magnetic, though Clara couldn't quite place why. He wasn't just handsome. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident but not arrogant. He glanced around, his gaze briefly meeting hers. Clara quickly looked away, her cheeks warming in embarrassment. She tried to focus on her book, but she could feel his presence in the room. It was as if the air had shifted, the usual stillness replaced by an unfamiliar energy. Clara told herself it was nothing, just another stranger in a city filled with them. Yet, deep down, a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that her ordinary evening had taken an unexpected turn. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of something, curiosity, perhaps even hope. But Clara quickly reminded herself of all the reasons she kept her walls high. Strangers didn't change lives. Or so she thought. The next evening, Clara found herself at the cafe again, her usual corner seat waiting for her. She told herself it was just another evening, but a small part of her couldn't ignore the possibility of seeing the stranger again. She tried to shake off the thought. It was silly to hope for such coincidences. But just as she opened her book, she heard a warm voice ask, "Is this seat taken?" Startled, she looked up, and there he was, the same man from the previous night. His smile was disarming, his presence both calming and unsettling. Clara managed to nod, and he slid into the seat across from her. "I noticed you were here yesterday," he began, his voice smooth but unassuming. "I don't usually visit this cafe, but I can see why you like it." Clara was taken aback by his ease in striking up a conversation. She hesitated, unsure how to respond, but his genuine demeanor made it hard to keep her guard up. She found herself smiling faintly, and before she knew it, they were talking. His name was Daniel, and he had recently moved to the city. He spoke about his love for quiet places, how he'd stumbled upon the cafe while exploring, and how it reminded him of home. Their conversation flowed effortlessly. Daniel had a way of making Clara feel at ease, as though they had known each other for years. He was curious about her, her interests, her favorite books, even the little details she rarely shared with anyone. And for once, Clara didn't mind opening up. She told him about her routine, her love for books, and her fascination with watching the world from her window seat. In the days that followed, Daniel became a regular at the cafe. Every evening, he'd appear with the same warm smile, always sitting near Clara. Sometimes they talked for hours, other times they shared a comfortable silence, each immersed in their own world but somehow connected. Daniel had a way of making her laugh, of drawing out a side of her she had long buried. Clara found herself looking forward to those moments more than she cared to admit. The days no longer felt so monotonous, and the once familiar cafe seemed brighter, livelier. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged, like someone genuinely cared to know her. Yet there was something about Daniel that remained elusive. He rarely spoke about himself, skillfully steering the conversation back to her whenever she asked. Clara noticed it but didn't press him. She told herself it wasn't her place to pry. They were just two people sharing moments, nothing more. But as much as she tried to keep things light, Clara couldn't deny the way her heart fluttered when Daniel laughed or the warmth that lingered long after their conversations. Against her better judgment, she felt herself beginning to hope again, even if she didn't fully understand why. Weeks passed, and Clara's life had transformed. She felt lighter, happier, as if Daniel had brought a spark of color into her once gray world. Their evenings at the cafe became her favorite part of the day, and she couldn't help but feel that he was becoming more than just a friendly presence. Every laugh, every shared story deepened the connection between them. But a small voice in the back of her mind reminded her to be cautious, to not let her heart get carried away. One evening, Clara arrived at the cafe a little earlier than usual. She picked her usual spot, expecting Daniel to walk in at any moment. As she waited, she heard a low voice coming from the table behind her. The sound was unmistakable. It was Daniel's voice. She froze, curiosity and unease washing over her. Slowly, she turned her head just enough to listen without being noticed. What she heard made her stomach drop. Daniel was talking to someone on the phone, his tone calm but serious. "I told you I'd be back in a few weeks," he said. "No, she doesn't know. Look, I need to handle this my way. Don't call me again." The words felt like ice coursing through her veins. Who was he talking about? And what didn't she know? Clara's mind raced as she tried to piece it together. Was he hiding something from her? The thought made her chest tighten. She wanted to confront him right then and there, but her body refused to move. Minutes later, Daniel walked past her table, his usual smile in place, as if nothing had happened. He sat down across from her, casually asking about her day. Clara forced herself to respond, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't shake the conversation she had overheard. That night, as she lay in bed, the doubts multiplied. Who was Daniel, really? Why did he keep parts of his life so guarded? And most importantly, could she trust him? The next evening, Clara decided she couldn't stay silent. She needed answers. When Daniel arrived, she skipped the pleasantries and asked him directly about the phone call. His expression faltered for the first time since she had met him. He hesitated, searching for words, and the look in his eyes confirmed her worst fears. With a deep breath, Daniel admitted the truth. He wasn't entirely honest with her. He had a fiancé in another city. "It's complicated," he said, his voice low. "I didn't plan for this to happen, Clara. I didn't expect to meet someone like you." The words stung like a physical blow. Clara felt her chest tighten as her world came crashing down. All the trust, the hope, the happiness she had started to rebuild, it suddenly felt like a cruel joke. She demanded to know why he had approached her in the first place, but his answers were a mess of apologies and excuses. Clara stood up, her voice trembling as she told him she couldn't do this. She wouldn't be someone's second choice, someone's secret. For years, she had promised herself she wouldn't let anyone hurt her like this again, and she wasn't going to break that promise now. Without another word, she walked away, her heart heavy with betrayal. The days following her confrontation with Daniel were some of the hardest Clara had ever faced. The cafe, once her haven, now felt tainted with memories she wished she could forget. Everywhere she went, she felt the weight of her heartbreak pressing down on her, the echoes of his words haunting her. She had trusted him, let him into her life, and allowed herself to hope again, only to be reminded why she had built walls in the first place. But amidst the pain, a small voice within her reminded her of something important. She had walked away. She had chosen herself, her dignity, and her worth over the hollow promises of a man who couldn't even be honest. That thought, fragile at first, began to grow stronger. Clara realized that this pain wasn't a step backward. It was a chance to reclaim the life she deserved. Determined to move forward, Clara started to make small changes in her routine. Instead of retreating into isolation, she pushed herself to explore the city, visit new places, and rediscover the joy of her own company. She joined a local book club where she met people who shared her love for stories. Slowly but surely, she began to feel like herself again. Only this time, stronger. The cafe, though painful to return to, was still a place that had brought her peace long before Daniel had entered her life. One afternoon, Clara decided to reclaim it. She sat in her usual spot by the window, ordering her favorite latte. The memories of Daniel lingered, but she didn't let them consume her. Instead, she let them serve as a reminder of how far she had come. As the days turned into weeks, Clara found herself reflecting on the entire experience. What she had thought was a tragedy had, in some ways, been a lesson. Daniel had hurt her, yes, but he had also reminded her of something she had forgotten, her capacity to feel, to hope, and to care deeply. And while he hadn't deserved her trust, she realized she didn't regret the part of herself she had shared. It had been real, and it had been hers. One evening, as she sat watching the sunset from her apartment window, Clara felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of peace. She no longer yearned for what had been or worried about what might come next. She had learned to trust herself again, to find happiness in her own strength. Her life wasn't perfect, and the scars of her past remained, but they no longer defined her. Clara smiled to herself, knowing that she had come out of it all with a clearer understanding of who she was. She didn't need a handsome stranger or a whirlwind romance to feel alive. She had the power to create her own vibrant life. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. Not for someone else to save her, but for the future she was building for herself. A future where she was her own source of happiness.